In shadows in the ceiling, a chance of screens revealing hypothetically the mason failed at forming my visage. An architect can't capture my form in alabaster. I am infinitely temporal and also very shy. Leaves into me, growing through me. On your tibula, you've tattooed me. Forgotten by villagers and National Trust visitors, embarrassed by the countryside, they huddled in the towns. Besieged by motorways, I fester in the hallways, a moldable mythology for all of your designs. Are you moving to the country? Folklore fetishists, we don't want you. Are you dreaming or fantasizing of ancient mystery? You won't find it. The turning is the rotting is the growth is the decay is the fecundity is losing is the building is the fruiting is the ripeness is the dying is the day is the expression is the loathing is the soil is the shame is the embracing is the swelling of the sun is the electrical convenience is choking rivers. Life the witness grows and kills me, leaves the celebrants chlorophyll me. You won't liberate or subsume me. You like everything belong to me.
So I had this idea where I would, because basically I just haven't done any of the work yet for this show that hopefully this is, you're watching the show. You're in the show, you're watching the video, which is this video, which is me talking. But this is not now. Now is August and I'm walking around, early August, and I'm walking around thinking, how am I going to make this work? And I don't think I'm not going to be able to make the work that I said I would make. So this is almost like in lieu of the work. Maybe that's a good title. In lieu of the work. My daughter's having this thing at the moment where she like holds in a poo for what feels like days. It's probably just she misses a day, but in Freudian psychoanalytic theory, it would be anal retention. And she's very controlling about what she's eating, which is obviously connected. And it makes you really feel like a failure as a parent, because it really feels like, am I doing it? Am I making her hold in the poos? Basically, this was originally, it was going to be people complaining, and this idea of complaint, this idea of me, the green man, like old gods. I really like the idea of them being like resentful about being forgotten or being, the green man isn't really an old god. He's a kind of a Victorian conjuring up of oldie England to explain lots of decorative elements from medieval churches, which may well have pre-Christian origins, but are probably not a unified spiritual figure or deity. The idea of the green man, there isn't that one. Anyway, this idea of complaining about that, and I got this verruca. There's verrucas in some of the other work, and it was really painful. You can't complain about a verruca. For one thing, it's horrible and people don't want to hear about it. And I say that because I've got this colleague who loves to complain, and I love to complain. So when I see her, and we often are the first people in the office, we have a good old complaint. Anyway, she was complaining about her bunion, right? A bunion, the word bunion says it all. So I was like, oh, maybe this is a good time to complain about my verruca. And so I started complaining about my verruca. And she looked at me and was like, oh, it's horrible. Verrucas are horrible. It's disgusting. Like, why would you bring that up? Anyway, so you can't complain about them because of that, but also because, you know, they're very minor. Like, they might be really painful and uncomfortable. And it cost me like hundreds of pounds to get it removed. But also, yeah, they're just, you know, they're also just nothing. I'm like, you know, verruca, who fucking cares? There's a lot of misunderstanding about verruca. This idea of them having a root is like really widely held. People kept telling me that you have to pull it out and get the root out, but there isn't a root. It's a dermis, the surface of your skin, basically. Anyway, so I had, sorry, fly just went on my nose. Had this verruca and was thinking about how I could complain about. Anyway, so I was going to get other people to complain. I asked people to complain. I've got all these complaints, voice recordings of other people. I don't know if these are going to end up in there, like the other people. But I just thought maybe if I could just explain why I didn't make the work, that it would go some way to like getting at what I was trying to get at with the work in anyway. So it's in lieu of the work. I stood in some. Oh, I've got quite bad heartburn. I take this medication now. Got diagnosed with. I feel like someone called it. One of them called it. One of the doctors called it a genetic disease. I'm more comfortable with genetic disorder. It's like a very very minor disability. It's called myotonia congenita. Myotonia is a kind of very specific form of stiffness. Anyway, I've always had this symptom, myotonia. You can look it up. It's the same thing as fainting goats, if you've ever seen that video. Anyway, I always had it, and never got, like, you know, been tested for arthritis and stuff like that. But eventually worked out the symptom, got a blood test. Anyway, it's a genetic thing. It's very rare, 1 in 10,000. I don't know how rare. I mean, that's pretty rare, isn't it? But more common in Finland. Anyway, so I take these tablets every day for it now, and they sometimes give me a bit of heartburn. And if I don't take them, I get a really awful migraine that lasts for a day or so. And I think they relieve the symptoms. They definitely lessen them. Well, it feels like I have them, the symptoms left. Anyway, that's off topic. But, so back to the thing, which is probably this being in lieu of what the work was going to be. Yeah, so I had, me and my wife had another kid. So we got another baby. She's 4 weeks old at the moment. By the time the show's up and you're watching this, she'll be like 3 months or 4 months, depending on which one of these you watch. And there's another work in the show, possibly called Minor Work, or at least I made another work. I finished in 2022, a year after my first daughter was born, about how I struggled really to make any work at all for that first year of my first daughter's life. And weirdly, I just hadn't considered that, preparing for this show while just after my second daughter would be born would be tricky, which is funny, but also maybe like, not going to use the word natural because I'm not a big fan of the notion of the natural, but you know, like maybe obvious. Like there's a lot of stuff that you forget about having children, which is maybe why people sometimes have more than one child, because they don't remember all the horror of it. You know, obviously for the mother, like the childbirth, and that's bad for the mother and for the other parent as well. But then just like, you know, and not just like not having any sleep, but just not having any time to do anything else other than be a parent. And that lasts for a long time. We were only really just getting out of it with our first daughter when we literally were like, maybe we should have a second one. Idiots. No, I'm trying not to be dismissive or you know, do punchliney things in this. It's just trying to explain. Anyway, so I'm doing these things where I go on these little walks in the evening when everyone's asleep. So that's all I'm able to do. And you know, I remember so this other work, Minor Work, that really is about, you know, if you watch it, you can watch it online if it's not in the show. That really is about how maybe on some level, like you have to reorient your art practice. I had to reorient my art practice to just be act of noticing things I was interested in, and maybe that being enough. And maybe accepting that I wasn't going to be the sort of artist who made big works, or, you know, the sort of artist who had a big studio with loads of assistants who, maybe I should have accepted that. But thought accepted is a silly word. It's like I wasn't making that sort of work anyway. But I was chatting to a friend a while back about, he called it the star model of art. And he said people in British art schools post the young British artist, Damien Hirst, etc. People kind of got hooked on this star model of art, like only 2 of you will make it as artists, and, you know, everyone else will end up whatever not being an artist. And you were either an artist or you weren't, i.e. you either made money and were successful or you weren't. And yeah, you either had a studio, you know, an assistant, or you didn't. And it was just this kind of binary thing, predicated on this notion of the star, you know, like not necessarily celebrity artist, but like the artist who was on the circuit, the biennials and the commercial shows. And he was just like, when he pointed that out, I was just like, oh, I think I'm still operating on that. You know, this is not like in my 20s. This was in my 30s, you know, maybe before I had my children. But like, yeah, just there's something about that really rang true for me. And even though I'd never made that kind of work and had never been interested in it, and had been, you know, if I have any kind of politics, it is in my art, and that is resolutely not anti-commercial, but like anti, you know, anti-prestige, anti-status, anti-legacy in terms of the work I make. But it's really only, but maybe, and this is something I was thinking the other day, was that maybe it's only since I've had kids that those ideals, now they are real limitations on time, on headspace. You know, I've got a job as well as being a dad, and so it's no longer just an aesthetic decision or set of ideals. It really is limitations on the kind of work that is possible for me to even make. And obviously that it's lucky that I'm already interested in, like, what is, you know, shitty art, what is ugly art, what is the minimum that art can be in terms of subject matter and content and presentation and professionalism and effort and, you know, audience interest and maintaining interest and so on. Those questions are already present, and they've been maybe like made more real, or my answers to them are less idealistic. And by that I don't mean like less, I don't know. You know, when people talk about how young people are idealistic, I think the misunderstanding there is not that like idealism is my misunderstanding of it was idealism there isn't like, oh, I want everything to be, I'm a naive idiot and I don't understand anything and therefore blah blah blah. But they're like necessarily they're working, you know, you're working in the realm of ideas rather than in like practical limitations, and that is just a different paradigm. The point of this with kids is that you end up thinking about a lot of other things with kids. And so when you come to make art, it's not just that you don't have the time to whatever, put the work in or whatever. You just approach art in an entirely different way. So like, well, the film was going to be full of, the film I'm not really going to do, was going to have the Green Man, which is me, the one talking to you right now. But it was going to have all of these other, like, gods and goddesses, like real, you know, pre-Christian gods and goddesses. And the reason I'm saying, you know, like pagan kind of gods. And the reason I'm saying pre-Christian is because it was thinking about the particular Western context of this stuff, like European history. And the kind of unknown history of the conversion of, well, really thinking about the UK and Ireland, you know, I guess Europe as a whole. and thinking about what it means to be washed away, you know, what it is for a culture to really be overturned in that way. You know, obviously in Ireland, you still had, even post conversion, you still had the system of, I'm going to get the fucking words wrong now, clans or tribes or whatever, you know, it wasn't like the Roman Empire took over Ireland. But yeah, you did have this kind of revolution in religious power and belief, like structures of belief, and maybe and through that, like nameable feelings as well. So, you know, this idea of different feelings that could be felt and could be understood through the stories and ideas of a certain set of religious beliefs. And I did really like that idea that, you know, it's Nietzsche really, right? It's the name. And he was highly critical of it. His idea of, I'm in this bit of the field where there's this really territorial bee or wasp or something, and it's really not liking me being here. Sorry, also I just ate quite a lot of cauliflower cheese, so I might burp a little bit. Anyway, so like Nietzsche, his idea of kind of master and slave morality, very problematic. Just FYI, I do know that all these words are not, they're a bit like, ugh, but Nietzsche's obviously worth reading, despite his, or because of his eccentricities, right? Anyway, the point being that for Nietzsche, Christianity, the revolution that it entailed was a rendering of like all these kind of shitty negative feelings into feelings that were valorized, and actually feelings that were almost praised, like instead of strength, you know, like, and his claim basically was like, he thought classical culture like Greek and Roman culture, maybe Roman culture, I can't remember which one he was really into. Anyway, they were all into strength and power and beauty and will and blah, blah, blah. And then Christianity was into weakness and meekness and pity and resentment and bad feeling. And you know, Nietzsche wasn't exactly a powerfully strong man himself. He was prone to terrible illnesses physically and mentally. He famously died years after having a terrible breakdown in Turin, where he tried to protect a horse that was being struck by its owner. But the point being that this idea that Christianity wasn't just a different belief system, it entailed a different valorization of affects and a different priority of certain feelings. And one of those feelings, famously for Nietzsche, or the prime feeling, was ressentiment. Well, resentment really, but he used the specific French of it to say he was kind of describing a very specific feeling. And that feeling of envying others and wanting what others had, but doing it in a way that was like sneaky, right? So you don't just say, oh man, these fuckers are fucking me and I hate them and I want to kill them or whatever. You say these people are immoral and they're bad and it's unjust and stuff like that. What I do like is this very particular idea of like, and maybe it's universal or maybe it's particular to now that it's really relevant and comparable or something. But the idea of like the way we complain about others and the way we complain about others who have power over us is to not talk as though they have power over us, but to reframe them as like immoral or stupid or like doing something wrong that isn't simply just that they have power over us, that they are in a higher status position than us. And that to me seems super interesting, because it means that every time you complain, which as I mentioned, I do love to do, you're kind of being very creative and finding a way to complain that allows you to maintain your status position, or even kind of reposition yourself as somehow higher up than the thing or the person you're complaining about, which really has power over you, right? Like when you're complaining about something, it's because you've been unable to stop the thing happening, or you now have to deal with the consequences and you can't simply refuse whatever it is, whether it's at work or in your home life or whatever. I like that idea of complaint and resentment as kind of sneaky or creative, or there's a built-in lie or a built-in kind of arrogance, or I don't know. I mean, yeah, I'll probably have to edit this down. Anyway, so I really like the idea of these old gods, the real ones and fake ones, and the made up Victorian ones, as being somehow trying to complain about Christianity, which had won, right? Like there aren't any real pagans, right? Because that's why the word pagan just describes an area of religion that we don't really understand, because Christianity wiped the slate clean so very well, and then was also often the religion of those who began to keep histories in Europe. So what we have is this kind of very highly biased account of pre-Christian religions that mostly just talked about them as how they weren't Christianity and therefore were wrong and so on. But it is interesting, the idea, like thinking about when you are the God that is suddenly no longer believed in. And the reason for that is because, some other God has won, right? Like it's fairly straightforward. There's a power struggle and your followers became their followers. And I like this idea of gods disappearing and being washed away, and how do they talk about themselves? So I did loads of research when I was in Ireland, and I did loads of research when I was back in London at the British Museum and things like that, and B&A and stuff, and was finding lots and lots of interesting, faces of old, Roman gods and Irish gods, and was all geared up, and I was put in application, Arts Council application, to go to Dublin and look at their national collection and stuff like that, but didn't get the money, and now with the kids as well. So this is the other bit I should explain, that I put in for a grant and didn't get it. That's the first time actually I haven't got like one of my project grants before. And I always used to give advice to younger artists, saying, like the Arts Council, it's hard to get obviously, but the form is good, the form is not too hard, and it makes sense, and it helps you work out what the project is. But I didn't get the money, and it just really felt like I'm maybe not the right kind of project. My project's maybe not the sort of thing they're going to fund anymore, which I know is a very negative, pessimistic way of looking at it, and I'm sure I will apply again one day. But again, it's like the kids and the job stuff. It's like no longer, I don't again have the time to like invest in these things that are not going to come to fruition. So that felt like a bit of a shift into my thinking around this stuff. And I understood other people who said similar thing to me in the past, where before I've been really encouraging about applying for grants. Anyway, but in a weird way, it did free me up. I couldn't be doing this if I'd got the money from the Arts Council, because I wouldn't be fulfilling the thing that I said I was going to do. So, failing to make the work is a possibility that I can now explore, which I wouldn't have been able to explore if I had been successful in my funding application. Anyway. This is the fourth one. It might be the last one. Yeah, it might be the last one. Who knows? I was going to do this thing about the green man, all the old gods complaining. And, it was going to be, the original idea was, going to be, there's going to be songs and like stuff based on real research, and, like finding out kind of very like, stuff, talk to historians and trying to find out the unknown or the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns about that period of history. Because it really, obviously for reasons I mentioned already about lack of historical record or, I wasn't really looking at the Picts, the kind of Northwestern and Scottish, obviously not Scottish, Celtic society. They weren't much interested in written language, for example. So there really wasn't much history of their own at all before they were converted and became Christians. So very little is known about their religion. Not that I was looking at it. But anyway, it doesn't really matter because I'm not looking at anything. But yeah, so what's weird, right, is the Green Man is the outlier here, because the Green Man is not a mysterious god that did exist, but was, whose meaning was rendered, whatever, whose meaning was disappeared by Christianity or the wave of conversion or whatever. But rather, as far as anyone can work out, and this is mostly from a guy called Ronald Hutton, I think is the historian, was definitely a decorative feature. And the Green Man here being a number of... Sorry, I've just eaten a really bland curry that I made. My mother-in-law still said it made her eyes sting. Yeah, the Green Man as a decorative motif in churches and so on. And, in like pub signs and all these other places that it is found. There's lots of different kinds. The classic one is the leaves going in or out of the mouth, or leaves as kind of hair, or all over the face. And then you have these, I won't go into the details, but the Bury Man and the various green men that would parade through in summertime in different bits of, actually all over Europe, but yeah, different bits of the UK and Ireland. Actually, I don't know if there's an Irish tradition of the Green Man. Anyway, the point being that all of these motifs, figures, images, ideas, characters weren't really connected at all until this kind of, I can't remember what her name was. She was an Aristocrat, like a lady. I've forgotten her name, but I'll put it in the credits or whatever. Just Google it. She put together this idea, and it's kind of late Victorian, almost like the beginnings of the breakdown of Christianity. Actually, so really another moment where things are being washed away, and spiritualism's kind of really popular, and then the notion of paganism, like some kind of pre-Christian England that's more authentic than Christianity. So again, as Christianity is washed away by waves of secularism or modernity or atheism, you get this kind of how do we explain this to ourselves? How do we make sense of this to ourselves? She comes up with this idea that actually all of these figures are the same. Pre-Christian figure who is this Green Man, who's a figure of fecundity, or the change of the seasons, and the Green Man signifies both the abundance of summer, but the coming of autumn, and or maybe even the coming of winter and leaves falling off the trees, and the cycle of life and death, or life and rebirth, depending on which interpretation you think about. And this becomes quite popular, and it gets really popularised through a number of books. Hutton kind of looks at all of them that either tour around Great Britain, and as photography becomes more part of publishing, these photographers take photos of all these different, I'm going to use the wrong words, but like things on the top of churches and gargoyle-esque figures hidden in decorative motifs, and the way that it's like the Green Man motif could be found quite near to Virgin Mary's, and then they make a lot of that and how that is connected, and how perhaps Christian symbols are kind of layered on top of pre-Christian gods and so on. And eventually, the Green Man, these things then get kind of anachronistically layered back on to much more modern or much more recent historical things, like this idea of like old England and stuff. What were those freaks who dance around? What are they called? Morris men. All right, Morris men. It's relative, it's not some ancient tradition. It's a courtly dance, I think someone said it's from Henry VIII's time. Anyway, whatever. It's not some ancient dance of what's it meant to be? People have talked about it as being some ancient dance of ancient fertility dance. I mean, if you look at it and watch it, you can tell it's not an ancient fertility dance. But the point being that stuff like the Green Man kind of just gets kind of wrapped up into that, and it's almost as though it becomes an explanation when in fact it is an interpretation. My point here is that it's funny that the Green Man was one of the first things that I drew and was making these characters out of, because of all the things that I was looking at, you know, of all the old gods, he isn't. He wasn't. He never has been. But that says, as all of these interests do, says much more about why I'm looking at it than the thing that I'm looking at. Which is why I guess it's okay that, you know, I'm not giving you the references and it doesn't really make any sense as an idea. But anyway, I had this, you know, I've done some Green Man animations on this residency in Ireland back in 2019. Then it was COVID. Then I had a baby, got a job, struggled to make art for quite a long time. Animation is quite hard to, and various funding applications kept getting like knocked back because of COVID first off. And then, anyway, there were various like things I applied for, maybe like a Jerwood thing or something that was, you know, going to develop the idea. And they all just got knocked back. And if you know, you're watching this, you can see what it looks like. I know what my art looks like. I know it's very off-putting. I know that the way I move between ideas and styles and aesthetics and is very hard to track as for fun. I understand why I'm not an artist who is like, I'm not a good bet for people. I'm always getting, you know, going off on some weird direction and doing stuff that is kind of not objectionable, but kind of like distasteful sometimes, and maybe a bit adolescent in tone sometimes. And that's, you know, something I'm to accept. Anyway, but it's funny, isn't it? That like the thing that I started doing was kind of the wrong thing. Like once I'd done the research, realised that the Green Man, yeah, isn't this ancient figure, and as is in fact a Victorian invention, which once you know about it is almost like a satirical or like a joke about people who get interested in pre-Christian spiritual and religious beliefs, which is that you cannot know what they were. You cannot enter the mindset of someone or a society or a group of people from before your own time, and everything and anything you do is projection, and really what you're doing is a kind of self-created psychoanalysis of your own societal or personal belief systems and interrogating them through pretending to try and, or trying to find out or invent what people believed in the past. As I was putting together the work that will actually be or is actually in this show, and I was looking back, and it's all these collages that hopefully are on the walls right now. Hopefully, I mean, yeah. And they're all made up of pictures from my phone, which I have taken over the last 3 years since having my first daughter. But they're not just of stuff to do with my daughter, they're just stuff that I saw in the street. And again, going back to this other work, minor work, things that just caught my eye or were interesting, but that I could never do anything with because I didn't have the time to think about them more and do anything with them as artworks. And so now I'm just collaging them all together. And what I've realized is that, and this is the point, this is like what this work is about, or what I think it means for me as an artist and me as a person, is that, I mentioned like, you know, the distasteful work I make, the adolescent sense of humour and so on. But and I think earlier I said something about being interested in the ugly, the shitty, the minor, etc. And that's all true. And, you know, I do this other thing called the Bad Vibes Club. It's about the bad as bad rather than trying to, revalorize the bad as good, which goes back to this Nietzschean thing of the transvaluation was his word for how Christianity turned meekness and weakness into a form of strength and power. So I am interested in when shitty things are shitty, and when bad things go wrong, and when ugly stuff is ugly. You know, not trying to say that not trying to turn ugly things into beautiful. But what I did start to think about as I was making these collages, as I got them all printed, actually, no, not as I got them all printed, as I was laying them all out on this big Photoshop document that I had to send to the printer, as I saw them all together for the first time, rather than seeing them as individual moments of things that made me laugh or were formerly interesting but made of materials that could never be an artwork, you know, like spilled milk or formlessness, right? Like I got interested in this idea of formlessness, and my daughter was constantly creating these formless masses on the floor, or formless objects, really, like formless compositions of rice and beans and, you know, her spoon or whatever it like that she's just like held on the floor. Yeah, as I put them all together, I started to realize that, you know, this the green man, this invented symbol of the return of, or the turning over of the seasons, of change but of sameness, of repetition but development, of kind of, you know, eternal return, if you want to stick with the Nietzschean stuff, is meaningful for that reason. But I also started to think of something else, which I think is a nicer version, or a more relevant version to someone who's thinking about like creating art, is that whatever you do, however stuck you are, you know, in maintaining and in life, you know, just working and trying to get through things and doing the dishes and cleaning up and carrying your daughter away from the playground screaming because she wants to stay on the swings, or doing endless Zoom meetings and like doodling in your notebook or whatever. Like we produce, right? We produce. And I think I'd always been so overwhelmed by the maintenance and by the fact that I couldn't produce on the terms that I was used to producing. I go down to the studio and do a big drawing for like 2 weeks or whatever. I hadn't noticed that I was actually, or with the help of, especially with the help of my daughters, to stick to that side of things, I was producing so many more of these like crazy conjunctions of objects, or formless masses of food material, or like piles of things, or, you know, like I was doing so much more walking, so because I was walking around with a buggy or whatever. So I was seeing so many more weird things on the street. I was taking all these photos and having all of these moments of being interested, of seeing something. And yeah, that was good. I'm just trying not to build it up too much, because it's a minor point, but just that the green man went from this, for me, it went from this symbol of like what pre-Christian belief might have been, to this symbol of the way that any investigation of history, or an unknown history in particular, or history that can't be known, or prehistory in particular, that's the phrase, is really just an invention and an interrogation of, or a reflection of the person doing the investigating. You know, which is why people are interested in people who, whatever, believe in UFOs and do all that stuff, because if you don't believe in it, it's so interesting to see someone kind of lay bare their own prejudices or whatever it is, or confusion manifested as knowledge. But then, as I was making this work, I realized that, you know, the green man has always stayed an interesting and dual figure for me, but I wasn't so interested in the kind of like fakeness or falseness or silliness of the green man, and actually thought it was a pretty good symbol for the way that things keep happening and keep growing, actually the word that kept coming up to me was addition, like things keep adding up. And I think that's different to the eternal return, or like the, you know, this circular thing that is often attributed. And I think that's something to do with waste and excess. Anyway, I tried to read Bataille's, he's got a book on economics, kind of general economics, he calls it, about excess and luxury and waste. The Accursed Share, that's what it's called. And it's good. And his point is slightly different. But the main point is that there will always be an excess of energy, and there will always be like things that happen that are not productive. And I think I like this idea that there will always be things that happen that you can't predict. You know, you want to get through a day. Sometimes with childcare, sometimes I make it sound like I do all the childcare. I don't do all the childcare, by the way. This is not some weirdly perfectly progressive equity model of parenting that I'm doing. I'm just doing probably what quite a lot of co-parents do in the 21st century, right? Like, or, you know, in heterosexual couples, like probably what quite a lot of dads do in the 21st century. But, you know, sometimes with childcare, you can really just be like focused on the grind, like grinding out. Okay, I'm just going to get through to that. I'm going to go to the park for like an hour and a half and go home. She can have like half an hour of telly. And then we're going to have lunch, and then, we don't do nothing, a nap, then I have 2 hours nap. And so you're kind of like focused on turning it into the most boring day in the world, but it will finish. And then there will always be a moment where you, I don't know, do some amazing drawing with your child, or they make some amazing tower out of blocks, or just, like the milk that gets spilled, like looks really cool or whatever. It's not a big thing, but I just think that that's all I have at the moment. Things keep adding up, and that seems to be enough. Whereas I think that before I was trying to look for meaning in a very different way, and there was still a sense that there was a right and a wrong thing to happen. But now I'm thinking more and more that things just happen. And maybe that's enough.